Okay, Dr. Ashley, what makes failure such a crucial part of success and growth?
Great question. Failure I like to think of as being feedback, not just an outcome. And so if we think of failure as being feedback, then it can actually help us to reach our goals, whatever that may be. When I was in graduate school, I was in a lab that studied child cognitive development. And so I worked a lot with children and adolescents. And something that I noticed just across time working with kids is they varied in their just intrinsic ideals of their own abilities. And so there were certain kids who overestimated their own abilities and they just tended to think that they could do anything. And what I saw as a result of that is that they were willing to try things that they might not otherwise. And even if they failed, they were still learning. And over time, they would get better. And this is actually something that researchers have studied. And in fact, my advisor from that lab, that's one of the things that he would study is that children who had a tendency of overestimating their abilities, and he researched cognitive abilities, but it's also true of actual behaviors as well. Those children are more likely to persist in whatever actions they're taking. And so therefore are more likely to be successful in the end. And I contrast that with the group of kids that I saw who did not have that same feeling, just intrinsically, for whatever reason, did not have that same overestimation of their abilities. And those kids would not even attempt whatever the task is. And so it's like their fear of failure held them back because we wouldn't even know what the outcome is. Maybe they would be successful and maybe they wouldn't, but they wouldn't even try for it. And so when you think about failure as being instrumental in success and growth, just our ability to try a task, to attempt a task, that alone is going to get us further along than if we're sitting on the sidelines and we don't even attempt it. There are tons of examples of people from history or even modern times who have been unsuccessful previously in their careers and then been able to use that failure to springboard to something bigger and better. Really popular one or famous one is Oprah, that she was actually fired from her very first news anchor job, and her producer told her that she was not fit for television. And then, of course, she went on to have one of the most successful television careers in history. And so using failure as information, as a piece of feedback and information for us to learn and grow and evolve across time is going to help us to ultimately get closer to our goals than we would if we are afraid to even attempt it. And that's something that is also backed by research in terms of a concept called growth mindset. So there are researchers who look at those who believe that we can improve across time. That is what growth mindset is the belief that you can attempt something and get better at it across time. That those people actually do in fact get better across time than those who kind of sit back and don't even attempt it. And an interesting thing is when I was working with children as a graduate student and I was looking at these groups of kids, and it's the kids who would attempt something versus the kids who wouldn't even try. If we think about that as growth mindset, like those kids who have the growth mindset versus those who don't, you might be concerned that, okay, well, which category am I in? And if I'm the category that just doesn't even attempt it, then, it's hopeless for me. But there's actually research that shows that that's not the case, that we can grow and develop in growth mindset itself. So that intrinsic belief that we can improve across time and get better, that can be developed itself. It's just a matter of cognitive reframing, which is essentially reframing the way we're thinking about things. So if we have a tendency to think, I can't do it, just changing it so simply to say, I can't do it yet. I'm not there yet, but I could get better and I can improve and grow and learn from this and get better. That itself will help to develop that growth mindset where across time we are going to be more likely to take those risks, even if it includes failure, and to use that failure as feedback to get better for the next time.
God, yeah. So the main idea is that you learn so much more when you keep trying, right? So when you try the first time, if you fail, which you probably will, you'll learn something, and then you'll try again, and you'll probably fail again, and then you'll learn something else. And then, for example, let's say 100 attempts later, you have so much insight and experience, which you can now use to eventually like overcome that challenge that's been stopping you, right? Now,
Exactly.
something that you said is really interesting to me. So when you were working with kids, first of all, how old were they, and why did they vary? Like, what was it like? Was it more of their like natural psychology, just their genes, or is it how they were raised? Like, why did they vary in their ability to estimate what they were capable of? Because I think that's really interesting.
It's a great question. And unfortunately, it's not a very satisfying answer because the answer
Mhm.
is it depends and both. So this is the
Yeah.
age old, is it nature or nurture type question. And what we know from research is that both are very important and both play a factor in who we are as people. So when I was working with children in graduate school, I worked initially with kids that were elementary school aged. And so it was about 5 to 10-ish. I
Yeah.
then went on later on to work with adolescents as well. But when I was talking about that story of seeing the kids kind of naturally vary, it was more elementary aged. But it's very likely that both their genetics and their nurture are both factors in how they come to perceive the world and interact with the world in terms of their own beliefs in their own abilities. The self-efficacy is the term in psychology, where we have this belief that we're able to accomplish the things that we want to accomplish. And that degree varies based on person, but it is likely something that we are both born with and also are able to have nurture interact with that, where when parents or caregivers are more encouraging, that is probably going to help children to have greater self-efficacy. Whereas parents who are more likely to take control of a situation or just take over, that can damage self-efficacy for children. But there's also, that's the kind of the nature side, but there's also, or excuse me, the nurture side, but there is also a genetic predisposition there as well. So it's really both, which I know is not a satisfying answer,
Yeah.
but it's true.
Hmm. Yeah, it's fine. Okay, so when it comes down to the genes side of things, right? Like, what is the normal biological makeup that leads to a person truly believing that, I guess they can do things which might make them look delusional, but, again, if they keep trying and trying and trying and trying and keep going for like 10 years, I mean, they're eventually going to get there. Obviously, there are some exceptions, right? But like most of the time, you are going to get there, right? But like, what is that makeup though? Like, what leads a person to truly believe that they can do it, like in terms of how they're wired?
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a great question. And anytime that we talk about genetics, there's never really one single gene, or I shouldn't say never, but rarely is it one single gene that's responsible for an expression of behavior, especially when we're talking about patterns of human behavior that are complex.
Hmm.
So it's typically a cascade effect. And it even gets more complicated than that because it's also often not necessarily a gene per se. It could be a genetic allele, and the expression could be turned on or off depending on nature. So it's impossible to really point to one specific thing, but in genetics in general, it's something that's passed on throughout biology. So very likely something in the parent's DNA that then gets passed on and expressed in the child
Hmm.
depending on their environmental circumstances.
Okay, so it's kind of interdependent, right?
Absolutely. It's very interesting.
Okay.
Yes, that's a great way to
Okay.
describe it.
Yeah. Okay. And now you said when it comes down to being nurtured, right? One of the main things is obviously your caregivers, which oftentimes is your parents. They have to be encouraging, right? Now, is there any other aspect here? Because like there are so many cases of people who didn't have parents that were actually supportive, but then they still had a lot of belief based on something else that they may have saw in their life or just an experience. So like what other components make up this whole idea of being nurtured into believing that you could do things that other people think is not possible?
So it's really, it gets complex when we're talking about the causes of human behavior. But I think that ultimately, in terms of those children who are not necessarily having the nurture aspect, then it really is probably more a biological predisposition within themselves, that some kids just come naturally more confident in their abilities and more willing to engage in risks and risk taking. And even though They experience failure very likely. We all do. You can't get out of life unscathed. All of us experience failure. Those children are not impacted in a negative way from that type of failure. And so it could be that they have supportive others. That's also often the case. It doesn't necessarily have to be the primary caregiver. For example, if the parents are not necessarily nurturing, they might get that from grandparents or from teachers or supportive others, or it could just really be their own biological makeup, that they are just the lucky few who are won that genetic lottery where they have that self-confidence without having the external environmental factors that have helped lead them to that behavior development.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. That's really interesting now, because for me, like, what I've noticed is that oftentimes people who tend to really believe that they can do great things, like, so much of it comes from seeing someone else talk about how they achieved great things. And there's a really big emphasis on the values of hard work and being persistent, right? Like, I'm not sure, like, do you know who's Kobe Bryant?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so obviously, he was like masterful at getting people to actually, believe in themselves, right? And he would do it through like really emphasizing how important hard work and being persistent is, right? So sometimes I feel like, when you truly believe in yourself, what you're really believing in are the values of working hard and being persistent. And then you believe that if you live by that, you will eventually make it. Yes, you can believe in your own talents and stuff like that, but there are many people who are extremely talented and they might get compliments, but if they don't believe in hard work and being persistent, that talent is very likely not going to go anywhere. Like, you know what I mean?
Oh, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Really, with so much of success, it's showing up and putting in the work. That really is exactly what you're saying in terms of persistence. Show up, do your homework ahead of time, so you're prepared for whatever it is. If it's work, life, whatever the situation is, that itself is going to help lead you toward the path of success, because it doesn't just fall into most of our laps. For the majority of us, you have to repeatedly show up across time. It's not just a one-time thing. And failure is intrinsically part of that. So the persistence comes with the standing up after the failure, with not giving up, with the continuing even when it's difficult, even when you don't want to. You can see this also if you even just think about like an exercise routine or a New Year's resolution related to that with health and fitness, that it's not the resolution that matters. It's the persistence, the consistency across time. That's what's going to get you. So it doesn't have to take one killer workout session. That's not going to give you the results. But even if you have a lot of lackluster workout sessions, but you're consistent, you're showing up every day and you're putting in the work and you're putting in the effort, that's going to take you closer to your goals than if you are really excited, one time or for 1 week, that first week of January in the new year, and then that motivation fades, where what's left behind is the consistent practice. And that's what you really have to hone and work toward in order to reach that success ultimately.
Yeah, for sure. Now, like most people, like they know that it's important to try and fail, right? Like most people, they kind of know that. But like, even if they know that, why do people have a hard time actually fully embracing this concept? Because again, people talk about it a lot, right? But like talking about it and actually like living by it are two completely different things, right? So why do you think people genuinely have a hard time actually embracing that?
Sure. I think that failure is not glamorous, and many people do not share their experiences of failure. And so all that we see when we see someone who's successful are their successes. We don't see the failures and the struggles that they've had to overcome in order to get there. Oftentimes when we think of someone who's an overnight success, like maybe you think of a musical artist who's just blown up on the scene and, is this quote unquote overnight success. When you actually dig into their background story, the vast majority of these people have been grinding it out for years. So again, kind of going back to that persistence and consistency across time. And that's what it takes in order for them to get their quote unquote big break. The big break comes from the years of struggle and hustle and grind. So those who are maybe not embracing the concept of failure or don't recognize its value, I think it's just because they don't see that that is part of the journey. What we see is just the success and not the failure. Also, it's hard not to tie failure to self-worth for many people. There are intrinsic rewards, socialization rewards for perfection versus iteration. And so to some extent, it's a bit of a cultural thing too, to be able to not worry about the fear of judgment, especially if it's in public, a public judgment. And in terms of our workplaces, oftentimes failure is tied to retribution. There might be some sort of reprimand or remediation that takes place as a result of failure. So it's not always part of the culture to embrace failure and to see failure as a learning opportunity. This is also something in thinking about kind of the psychological aspect of failure that is related to our neuroscience as well. So the amygdala, which is part of our brain, it activates with threats. So it's sort of a threat activation system. And that's activated when we fail. And so then we have this fight, flight, or freeze response. And it's not a good situation for us to be able to learn from our mistakes. And this area, the amygdala, also has shown in studies that it lights up when we are afraid of social evaluation, when we're thinking that we're going to experience some sort of social evaluation. And it's the same type of neural circuits that are lit up when we experience pain, actual physical pain. And so thinking about what that's doing to your brain when you're afraid of failure or afraid of potential social evaluation, that it literally feels painful. That's not a good opportunity for us to be able to learn from our mistakes and to come back from them and to process that as part of the process in iterating what our next step is toward ultimate success. And so I think that it can be challenging for people to see failure as a positive when oftentimes culturally it is not viewed that way.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. So basically, what you're saying is that it's not glamorous. Right? I mean, like it's not something that looks cool in the eyes of others, right? Because if you actually live by it, first of all, you'll notice that you're like the only one from the people that you know that's actually living by that, because no one does it, right? And as you go on this journey, 2, 3, 4 years down the line, if you still haven't made it yet, you're like, wow, man, like it's actually completely different living by it. Because again, people start to look at you differently. They look at you differently because when you start, you might get some encouragement, but again, as you go on the journey of 1, 2, 3 years of not making it, like that fear of being judged as not good enough is gonna get activated, right? Because we evolved to stay away from shame, because if we got shamed, historically, that normally meant that we were gonna get ostracized from the group, and historically that meant death, right? Humans can't survive on their own. I mean, now I guess we kind of can because of money, and we've built a world like that, right? But I mean, historically, that's just not the case at all. So that's really interesting. And then also the media, right? The media always likes to push these stories of fast success, right? And when you flood the media and people's minds with those stories, they tend to believe, oh, it should be like that. Versus, as you said, the stories of it taking years, and then finally you have that hockey curve type explosion, which we all see at the end, right? So that's pretty interesting.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Now, something else that you speak about is this concept of psychological safety, right? So can you tell us what that is and why is it important when it comes down to a person's ability to navigate through failure?
Absolutely. So psychological safety, it's a term that was coined by a Harvard researcher, Amy Edmondson. And this concept just refers to the belief that you can take interpersonal risks and not have to be fearful of punishment. And I was just talking about how oftentimes we're fearful of retribution or of social evaluation. So that's kind of the opposite. That's lacking psychological safety. So if we have psychological safety, if we feel like we can take risks without fear of punishment, then it's going to open up the opportunity for us to fail and to learn from those failures instead of being paralyzed by fear and not even taking any action. So in a workplace, this might look like someone who is willing to come up with new or creative or innovative ideas that are not always going to work. When you're in that field of looking at creativity and innovation, a lot of those innovations fail. That's just comes with the nature of it. However, if you are paralyzed by fear, then it's going to hold you back ultimately. You're not going to get as far, even as someone who's having failures or experiencing failures, because they're going to ultimately be able to put out more creative, more innovative work once they're able to overcome those failures versus the person who doesn't even try because they're afraid of the social consequences or professional consequences. So psychological safety is important because it allows us to learn from failure, and it rewires our brain in a way of seeing failure as just a piece of information instead of something that could cause harm or pain. And then there's also research that shows in the workplace that teams that have high psychological safety, which is something that has to be fostered from above, from leadership, that those teams are able to recover faster after mistakes than teams that do not have psychological safety. So again, when thinking about the amygdala being activated, and it's that fear or that fight or flight and then freeze reflex, if you're afraid of the potential punishment that comes from failure, the tendency is to freeze, and then there's no action at all. And so then we're not progressing in whatever it is that we're working toward, and there's less achievement of the team overall as a whole than those who have psychological safety.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay, so basically what you're saying is that, you have this belief that, hey, if I fail, it's like you're not going to get punished in a really severe way, right? So I guess that gives you that sense of comfort to fail, right? And then you're also saying that this belief comes from someone above, right? So like a leader or a caregiver. Now, is there anywhere else that you can draw this belief from? Because again, like as we spoke about, sometimes if you're not in the right environment, you're not going to get that belief, right? So is there any place else that you'd recommend that people can go to acquire that belief in like a truly organic way?
I mean, to be honest, if you are in a situation that does not have psychological safety and you are not in control of it, because sometimes someone holds a leadership position and they're able to control it and create that climate. But if that's not the case for you, then it's actually a mismatch of environment if you try to develop your own sense of psychological safety when it doesn't exist in the external world. And so it's actually something you want to be careful of, because it's in a way an adaptation to keep us safe. And if the external environment is telling you you are not safe to take those risks, and you think in your own mind, oh, I have psychological safety, it's fine to take risks, then you're going to be hurt. And I say that with quotations because it could be shame or humiliation. It could be punishment, depending on your environment, depending on if it's a teacher shaming you or a leader at work or whatever the case may be. But you don't want to have a mismatch between your own ideals and what is actually existing in the external environment. So I would not recommend developing psychological safety if that's not your actual world that you're living in. Now, we can take measures to try to increase it, and it depends on our level of autonomy in our environment. So if you have kind of a leadership role, or if people look to you in your friendship group, then that's something that you could help to try to develop and make that part of the culture. But we don't always have control over what's going on in the external environment. So it depends on what your situation is.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So it seems like, I guess if you figure out that, hey, this is your environment, it seems like the most effective thing to do is try and plot a plan to leave eventually, right? Because if that idea doesn't match, as you said, your environment, it's not going to work out, right? Because it's just going to lead to so much of like constant clashing of heads because they don't understand you, right? And I think this is one of the biggest problems, because I think it might sound kind of cold to say, but if you come from a normal background, the likelihood of people actually understanding the importance of failure and patience is extremely low, right? Because like you'll only truly understand it if you've been through it, right? Or if you've seen someone else that's quite close to you go through it themselves, right? So that's pretty interesting. So I guess the only thing, as we just spoke about, is to change the environment, and in like whatever way, shape, or form that you can do that safely, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that,
Mhm.
what we can control is ourselves. Sometimes we can control some extent of the external environment depending on our situation, but the main thing we can control is ourselves. And if you find yourself in a situation that does not have psychological safety and it feels like something that you're not going to be able to influence, then you control yourself. And so that is your own boundaries and the extent to which you're willing to open up to others. You could have selective vulnerability. So if I don't feel safe, then I'm not going to be vulnerable with the people that I'm not feeling safe with. And so then it is a matter of trying to take steps to protect yourself and whatever that looks like. And so it might mean leaving that environment. We don't always have that luxury. Sometimes you might feel stuck, and whether that's a real, reality that you're stuck, or in our mind is a different idea or a different topic altogether. But if you feel like you are stuck in an environment, well, then what you can control is your own boundaries and the narratives that you have in your own cognition, and just believing in yourself without necessarily putting yourself out there to others who may try to bring you down, essentially, and cause that punishment or retribution that you're afraid of in the first place.
Got it. Got it. Okay, great. Yeah. Now, something that's really important, like when it comes down to handling failure as you get older, because like you are going to eventually experience that, right?
Mhm.
One of the most important things is to have a foundation of overcoming obstacles and challenges when you were young, right? Because if you didn't have that foundation, for example, if you went through your entire childhood, your teens, and your early to mid 20s without ever facing, like a real challenge or an obstacle, I mean, the likelihood of you even putting yourself in a situation later on to experience failure is extremely low, right? So if like, what would you tell to a young person, or I guess just a person in general, what can they do on a consistent basis to start building that mental strength needed to overcome challenges and obstacles and failures as they do get into the real world?
I love that you use the word mental strength, because I think that is exactly it. That is what we need to be going for. And when you think about building your mental strength, it is very similar to building a muscle. If you were to try to start weightlifting and you want to grow your muscles, you can grow your mind muscles in the same way through practice. In psychology, there's a term called cognitive reappraisal. And that's essentially the idea of changing your patterns of thought. And so when you look at failures through the lens of positive reinterpretation, which is a type of cognitive reappraisal, this is the idea of looking for meaning or value, or trying to find the benefit of negative experiences. And so I can give an example from my own professional career, my own professional life. There was a time a few years back when I had two interviews that were on the same day. And they both felt like really big deals. And I prepared quite a bit for the first one. And just with time being finite and you can't do all things, at all times, I didn't prepare as much for the second one. And so then, what do you think the result was? I felt like the first interview went really well. And the second interview, I feel like I bombed. It was terrible. And then looking at that as a piece of information, well, I learned some things. I learned, okay, you have to put in the time and the effort. You can't just phone it in. Maybe that works for some people some of the time, but for the majority of us, we have to put in that time and that work in order to have the outcome that we're looking for in terms of success. And so instead of getting caught in negative rumination, which is a natural tendency for many of us, is to think about like, oh, that was terrible and that was horrible and I'm embarrassed and that was awful and therefore I am terrible and I am horrible and all of these things. No, you look at it as, what can I learn from that? Well, I learned some valuable lessons. I learned that when I put in the time and the effort, it went really well. And when I don't put in the time, that the consequences are that it's not as good of an outcome. And so those are things that I need to change moving forward. And so looking at any type of failure in that way as offering opportunities for learning. And so that's really what I try to think of in terms of failures is it's an opportunity. It's not just a failure. It's an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for learning. And so for young people, when they think about different times that they've experienced failure or have fallen short of their goals, what can they learn from that so they can improve for next time? And then something else that's really positive or helpful for them would be to set some sort of stretch goals and small wins that can help to protect and enhance their self-efficacy. So I mentioned the self-efficacy earlier too, as being just the ability to follow through on what we think we can do. So when we think we can do something, the extent to which we actually can do it, that is going to be nourished and fed by engaging in goals, small goals that we're able to win. So instead of just having the giant goals, the very lofty goals, set smaller goals that get you there along the way. So it's okay to have the big lofty stretch goal, but if you have benchmarks on the way that will get you there, that's going to help you in terms of your self-efficacy and in terms of building that mental resilience where you're able to see failures as a piece of information, as feedback, and not as a catastrophic end of the world type of thinking.
Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay, so basically, what you're saying is, try to find the positive in the failure, right? So this normally comes in the form of looking at this situation as an opportunity to grow and to draw out lessons, right? So let's just zoom in on that a bit more. So if you do go through a failure, what is the best way to analyze the failure and draw out lessons, like actual lessons that you can use to improve in your life, right? Because sometimes when you have a massive failure, it can kind of cloud your judgment, right? Because you don't actually know what went wrong. So if you had to give someone a process, how can they dissect that situation and draw out those learning lessons?
Great question. I think one of the keys is to pause. And so oftentimes when we experience a massive failure, we get into our thoughts about it. And I think that's very common for us to start ruminating and just thinking about it and obsessing over it. And at that moment, that's when our amygdala is activated and we're in the middle of this fear response that actually hinders learning. So we're not in a good place for the first couple of days to even think about the lessons that have come from the failure. So when you have a big failure, the best thing you can do is kind of take a time out for a minute. And by a minute, I mean probably a couple days. And so you need to give yourself some time and to separate what happened from how you feel about yourself. So what happened, the event that occurred, the failure that occurred is not you. That does not make you a failure. That does not mean that you or your work or whatever you're working toward is a failure. It means that specific instance was a failure. And so pausing, allowing yourself to kind of think through that in a couple of days, it's going to give you the opportunity to see the failure as a learning lesson and to not engage in self-destructive cognitive distortions that are going to cause you to go into a shame spiral, essentially. So you really want to avoid those negative rumination loops where we are just obsessing over the failure. It is something that feels productive at the time, but is not. I love the quote. This is going to age me a little bit, but the quote from Van Wilder, which was a popular movie when I was college age. There's a quote that said, "Worrying is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but it doesn't get you anywhere."
Yeah.
And when we think about that in terms of analytical rumination, it's just this obsessive concern about the problem or the failure. But ultimately, it's not productive in helping us learn from the failure until we're able to kind of step back a second and separate ourselves from the actions, from whatever happened, and to think about it more constructively. Another thing in relation to this is whenever we've experienced a big failure, oftentimes people have a tendency of it ramps up our anxiety. And anxiety is a worry about others' concerns and worrying about what others think about us, and ultimately worrying about future things that have yet to come. And so a way to combat that is to try to focus on the here and now, living in the present, and just thinking about what is happening at this moment in time, right this second. I am sitting in a chair, or I am touching grass, or whatever. I'm having a warm cup of coffee. And when you really get into the here and now, that helps the anxious thoughts in our minds to be quieted. And so that can help us to avoid getting into this shame spiral after a big failure.
Got it. Okay, yeah. So basically, what you're saying is, first of all, obviously pause, right? Because like when you have a massive failure, you're just too like emotional, too reactive to actually think in a clear way, right? So I guess just pause for however long you need, and then you also said like detach your self-worth from the failure, right? Because that will stop you from spiraling and just looking at yourself in a really negative light, which is the worst thing that you can possibly do, because then you're just going to go into some hole, right? And then you said, one other thing is to focus on the present moment, right? Focus on like, as you said, drinking tea, or like just the next task ahead of you, instead of trying to think too far into the future and then, getting all like riled up, full of anxiety. And again, that's going to eventually result to you self-destructing, right? Mm-hmm. Now, so like after you do calm down, and then once you're more of in a calmer state, like what questions should you ask yourself to draw out lessons, right? To actually find out, okay, you know what? This is something that I can learn, and I can actually apply it to this sector or that sector. Like what questions should you start to ask yourself once you've kind of really overcome that phase of being emotional?
Mm-hmm. I think an important thing is guided reflection. And this is something that's actually backed by research as well, as being able to help us to overcome setbacks in life. And so this is the ability to think about and critically analyze, what went wrong specifically, and then why, and what was in control, what was in my control, and what could I do differently in the future. This is something that as a professor, I have students who evaluate my courses every semester when I teach. And this is something that I like to teach other faculty members when we're reading our student evaluations. We can have a tendency of really personalizing things and taking everything personal, or, being like taking those criticisms to heart, essentially. And so I like to break out criticisms and into kind of quadrants, really. And I look at the positives and the negatives, and then look at what is in your control and what is not in your control. And so I might have a student say, I hated this class because it was at 8 a.m. Okay, well, that's something that is not in my control. That is the time that they gave us. Or they might say, it was freezing in this room, or it was after lunch and I was tired, so whatever. Those are things that are not in our control. So we can just go ahead and ignore that, because that's something that is not in our control. Now let's focus on the things that are in our control. And then again, kind of thinking about the quadrants, don't just focus on the negatives, focus on the positives also. So what went well? What was not a failure? What went well? And so we make sure that we do that again in the future, or that we do more of that in the future, or ramp that up. And then what went wrong, and why did it go wrong? And how could we change that in the future? So much of learning, of lessons in life, it's iterative. And so really in all realms, whatever we're doing, think about things as iterations, or being iterative in nature. And we're not going to nail it the first time. And so if you think about, I don't need to be perfect, but I want to get consistently better or improve across time. Okay, well, that's going to happen through small incremental changes across time. So instead of dissecting the failure in a way where we are obsessing over it, or engaging in cognitive distortions where we personalize it and think like, oh, this is all my fault, so I'm a terrible person, I'm a terrible human, I can't do it, I'm no good at whatever XYZ things. That's personalizing. There's also catastrophizing. So we tend to think of something as just the worst case scenario. This is the worst thing that could ever happen. Or like magnifying a disaster to where maybe there were some good parts, but we don't even look at the good. All we look at is the negative. those are all different types of cognitive distortions. We want to focus on kind of taking it back into the context of the bigger picture, because there likely were some successes along the way, or there were some positives. There were some, and if not, there were things that we learned, that we can do better. And so having that type of guided reflection where we're processing in that type of way, it's more analytical instead of personal. So we're able to separate ourselves from the failure, separate ourselves from the mistake or whatever the event was that we might deem as a tragedy at the time. But that little bit of separation helps us to look at it through more objective lens instead of looking at it as something that was entirely our fault and kind of getting stuck in that spiral of shame that might otherwise incapacitate us so that we're not moving forward in a positive way.
Got it. Okay. Now, something that you keep speaking about is small wins, right? Which is obviously extremely important because, when you have a massive failure, like it can really have a big impact on your self-confidence and your self-trust because, maybe you've been working hard for years, right? And then maybe you did make progress, right? Hence, the positive elements of your growth. But then when you have a massive failure, like you fail so hard, like it feels like you went backwards. You know what I mean? And then it feels like you're in a worse position than you were when you started, right? So when it comes down to the small wins, like, do they have to be in relation to, I guess, the project or the space that you're trying to improve in, or can it be in something that's completely, like unrelated, right? So can you go a bit deeper on the small wins and talk about how that actually works?
Absolutely. Obviously, if we can have the small wins in the area that we're working on, that's great. However, when we talk about the mind as a muscle and we're exercising this muscle toward increasing our self-efficacy, increasing our growth mindset, that can happen in any realm. So those small wins can be in any realm, anything that's going to help increase our self-efficacy or our feeling that we're able to accomplish the tasks that we're setting out to accomplish is going to help us in other realms as well. So it's not limited to just that one area. So if you are finding failure in one area and then you switch to another and you're finding successes there, that can actually help you feel that confidence or gain that confidence to come back to that first area if in fact you want to do that, if that's what you choose to do. Maybe the second area is going well and you just want to keep going that path, and that's fine as well. But the great thing about thinking of the mind as a muscle is it really applies to all aspects of our behavior and how we interact with the world. And so being able to gain self-efficacy in any area is going to help us across all areas.
Yeah, 100%. And that's, one of the biggest reasons why fitness is so powerful. Like people always talk about going to the gym for their mental health, right? It's not always about the fact that, okay, it just makes you feel good in that moment when you're sweating and stuff like that, right? It's just as time goes on, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the line, you see like a change in your body and you can see, hey, 6 months ago, I couldn't lift, for example, 100 pounds on the bench press. And now I'm at like, 180, right? So you can literally see the growth that happened through the work that you've put in, right? So those small wins will allow you to believe again in the fact that, hey, you could improve and you could make a comeback, which will eventually get you out of those dark holes that you might find yourself in after you fail so badly, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now, Yeah. Sorry, are they going to say something or?
Oh, I was just going to say also, like, just in relation to that, there is a mind-body connection. So exercising your body and keeping your body healthy will also, that there's a feedback loop there with your mind, and it's going to help you to be healthier in terms of psychological health or mental health as well. Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. Now, one other aspect of failing that makes it so difficult is the public humiliation aspect of it, right? Which is what we kind of spoke about a bit earlier. Now, if you're going through that, what would you recommend that people do to overcome that? Because that can be really, really hard, right? In terms of like being perceived in a certain way. Because even if you tell yourself, hey, that's not me, like the reality is as a human being, you're going to respond based on the way people view you or look at you or talk about you. It's just like human thing, right? So if you're going through something like that, how do you overcome it?
So first I would recognize It is hard. I think it's fair to name it as it is. You don't want to just sweep it
Yeah.
under the rug. You got to feel the feelings. And so, yeah, public humiliation is hard. Nobody likes that. It's not fun for anybody. Some things that I think help reframe it are that, first of all, just a general truism is people who kind of hate on you are not those who are doing better than you for the most
Yeah.
part. It is people who
Yeah.
are jealous of you, who are not doing
Yeah.
as well as you. And so when there's someone who is going to try to publicly humiliate you, for the most part, those aren't the people who you're trying to be anyway, because those are the people who you've already surpassed. So you need to look toward role models who are going to lift and build you up. Those are the ones, who are kind of above that you're trying to get to their level. And those people, by and large, want you to succeed or would be willing to help you succeed. And so they're not going to humiliate you for failure. Another thing that comes to mind is Brene Brown is quoted as really she's quoting Theodore Roosevelt. So I'm quoting someone who's quoting someone else, but
Yeah.
she talks about a Theodore Roosevelt speech where it's a famous speech called "In the Arena," and the speech is essentially that when someone is not in the arena with you, doing battle with you, that they don't get to have an opinion on how you're doing it. And so people oftentimes want to look at you from the outside and give critiques or criticisms. I'm not interested in that if you are not also fighting the fight. So if you're not in it with me, I don't want to hear about it. And also, along that same vein, people will oftentimes, they like to list problems. There's problems with this or that or the other. I'm not interested in that either. I'm interested in solution building. And so if there's some sort of public humiliation going on, I'm interested in how do we get better? How do we evolve? How do we grow from that? And if someone is just stuck in pointing out the problems or in giving you criticism without any sort of constructive aspect or element to that, they don't get to have an opinion on the matter, because I'm not going to allow that. And so there's also some level of that boundary setting that I talked about earlier, where that's what we have control of is our own boundaries. And then the last thing I would say is to own our own mistakes. And there's a lot of power in that. So when we fail from something, just call it like it is, like, wow, that was a disaster. And when you do that, when you call out your own mistakes or you point out like, yep, I'm aware that was a failure, then that takes that power away from someone else who might try to do that to cut you down. It's like, yep, I've already acknowledged it right from the get-go, so you don't have to do it because I'm aware. And by kind of taking that wind out of their sails, it helps to lessen that humiliation that they might try to confer upon you, and instead reframes the situation into now one where you're like, yep, it was a disaster, a total and utter disaster. And now where do we go from here? So it kind of like flips it on its head. Instead of the focus being on the disaster, focus is now on how do we move forward in a productive way, and where do we go where we can improve from this and get better for next time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that's really important, because like you'll notice oftentimes, when people are hating, right? It's because like they're trying to convince themselves that, hey, you know what? I made a good choice by not taking that risk, right? See how, that person failed, they had the, I guess, courage to go and do, but they failed, right? So good thing I didn't do that. And so like you have to frame them in a certain way so it makes you feel safe, right? Like you'll see that everywhere, especially online. Like, I mean, especially nowadays it's at a whole new level, but like you'll see it pretty much everywhere, right? And then you also mentioned talking to superiors who understand the process, or obviously if you don't have anyone like that in your life, you can always go towards books or podcasts or like different interviews with people who understand the process. And like just by watching them talk about it, you can feel and understand that, hey, this is just a part of the process, right? So that'll give you that safety, in a sense that you're looking for. And then you also mentioned, which is really, really good, it's just like you have to accept it, right? Because like, I mean, have you seen that human consciousness scale where it's like peace, joy, love? It's like a scale that shows you human emotions and the vibrational frequency that's going to be like associated with it. If you want, I can send it to you. So basically, like when you just accept it, it's one of the highest forms of human consciousness, right? The only few above it is like love, joy, peace, reason, and stuff like that. So when you accept it, like you can take yourself away from shame, which is all the way at the bottom, like shame, guilt, apathy, and then you rise up. So, I mean, they can say what they want, like you've already accepted it, right? So you're in a much healthier mental space, which is really interesting. Now, here's the thing with failure, right? Oftentimes it is an indicator that shows you, hey, you know what? It's kind of time to move on to something else,
Mhm.
right? Because it's not like you have to stay persistent if it's just not for you, right? So like, but how do you tell the difference though? Because I know this might sound kind of contrary to what we've been talking about, but like sometimes if you're just doing something over and over and over again and it's not for you, it's not necessarily like the smartest way to approach it, right? So how do you know when you should persevere and when you should move on to some other endeavor?
Such a great question. And I think this is so challenging because it's so personal. And so there's not necessarily
Yeah.
a one size fits all because it really is dependent on the person. And I think that the ultimate guide here should be your heart, like your soul, like you. And if it's something that you are passionate about still, even though you've been failing or experiencing nothing but failure, if it's something you believe in and you care about and you're passionate
Yeah.
about, keep trying for it. Keep going because the success comes after the failures, you know? But it's also okay to change our minds and to alter course. And I think sometimes we get stuck in a trap where we have just been trying something for so long, or we've put so much time and effort into it that we feel like we have to keep going. And maybe our heart's not really in it anymore. And at that point, now we're just engaging in something just for the sake of engaging with it instead of something that we actually care about or feel, kind of in our core. And that's the time that we might want to go ahead and switch course. This is something in psychology that we refer to as the sunk cost fallacy. It's where if you've put a lot of time and effort and energy into something, we want to just keep going because we've already invested so much into it that we don't want to abandon it. But
Yeah.
if that's just what it is sometimes. And sometimes that's the lesson, and being able to learn that we can let go of a dream or a passion that no longer serves us and we can go in a different direction. And that's part of the human experience too. Like that's okay. It's part of the deal of being human is deciding, you know what, that's not for me anymore. Or I have changed my opinion about this topic, or I've learned more and I've grown more, and therefore I don't have those same beliefs, thoughts, or opinions. And that's okay. And so it's really an individual level of being able to look inside and see how you're feeling as a person on the inside, which is really tough. It's really tough, especially when it's wrapped up with the potential of, having invested a lot of time or effort or energy or maybe money into an endeavor
Yeah.
and having to know, it's not for me anymore and cut those costs, even though we've already invested a lot in it. But that's what I would say is the guiding light is just where are your current values and is there a mismatch with that and what you're working toward? And what is your current passion? Where is your heart at? And what is that telling you to do? And if you follow your passion, you can't go wrong. You just, you can't go
Yeah.
wrong. And it's okay if it changes across time, but that's where you should be following. That's what you should be following as your guiding light and not just sticking with something for the sake of sticking with it or because that's what you've always done or that's what you've been doing. And so that's really kind of what I would say in answer to when how to know that it's no longer for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So like it is a bit hard to like verbalize, like whether you should persist or not because as you said, it's based on like passion and instinct. Like you'll know, like it's not like something you can really just put into words. Like you'll know like whether or not this is for you or not, right? And then as you know, because like you probably deal with many young people, right? This is one of the biggest problems. Like many people, like they don't know what to do with their life, right? Because like it's a blessing and a curse. We have so many options, right? So when you have so many options, you're like, what do you do? And then many people, they don't even take that first step into actually trying to figure things out because they don't know when they should persist, what they should, switch on. And then eventually you just kind of settle for something that shows up in your life later on, and then that leads to a lot of like resentment and so on and so forth, right? So like knowing when you should continue and should persist is one of the most important skills that I believe we should develop. But I mean, how do you develop it, right? Like it's passion plus instinct. So I guess it just comes down to putting yourself out there, and then you'll feel it. Like you'll know. Like it's not something that anyone has to really tell you. You know what I mean?
You definitely know when you feel the feeling of dying inside, and that's when you're pursuing something
Yeah,
that is not your
100%.
passion, you know. So
100%.
you'll know, and it
Yeah.
does. That you're right to say that it takes time to learn that necessarily, because I don't think that young people know right off the bat. Some people do. Some people have a very clear sense of
Yeah.
self, but some people it has to develop across time, and it's a matter of learning to trust yourself and trust your instinct, and that's a skill that we hone across time. Absolutely.
100%. Okay, Dr. Ashley, this is such a great episode. Unfortunately, we've like reached the end of our time here. But is there anything else that you want to tell anyone that's watching this? Because I mean, this is one of the most important, if not the most important thing, if you want to, I guess, live a good life, right? If you're afraid of failing, like I mean, you're gonna be full of resentment as time goes on. It's just gonna build on, right? So, is there anything else that you'd like to say?
I would say take those risks and share them with others. Sharing your failure stories is so valuable and important. So helping those behind you, look for mentors who can help guide you, and then look for those that are behind that you could help guide them, because there's always someone doing better and always someone doing worse. And so you can look both directions toward those who can help you and learn from your failures, and then share your failure stories with others who are coming up behind you to encourage them that they can also come back from their past failures. So that's what I would say. It's a human experience.
Yeah.
So we all go through it.
Yeah. Fantastic. Great. And if people wanted to go and find your work, where would you go and tell them to go?
I am on Instagram at Dr. Ashley Leads. And I also write a monthly piece for Psychology Today. The post is called Leading with Connection. So you can find me there.
Got it. If you can send me all those links, I will post it down below, and people can go and check it out if need be.
Thank you. Yeah.
No problem. This is wonderful. You have a fantastic day.
Thank you so much. It's been great talking with you.
Thank you. It's been amazing.
All right, bye.
Bye.